let's paddle down the sultry ribbon of resophonic bliss with a national guitar. Paul Simon famously likened the glinting, reflecting waters of the Mississippi Delta to the shining surface of one of these. Apparently he was mistaken, for this isn't the nickel-plated expanse of German silver which he had in mind. No, this is painted wood. And it's not even shiny, it's satin. What the dealio? It's true, when we think of National, we think of metal guitars. It was one of the defining features the Dopiero brothers had in mind when they tried to revolutionize the instrument in the mid-1920s. There were a number of wood-bodied experiments and prototypes in the development of their initial tricone model, and the first single-cone Triolians sold to the public had wood bodies too, but the intent was always to make them out of metal. Then at the end of the 1920s, the Dopieros left National to start the Dobro company, and they created a single cone model where the cone was flipped upside down and they had a special bridge support that was designed, it's called a spider, and those were definitely wood-bodied guitars. So from the very start, Resonator guitars sometimes came packaged in wood rather than metal. Dobros, of course, are heavily associated with country music. The National models with the blues, these distinctions were not intended at the start. You know, they were meant for Hawaiian music and dance bands. Have you guys heard of Jonathan Stout? He does like American Songbook and jazz standards with really amazing chord melodies. I wish I could play like that. Sometimes he uses a metal-bodied National, and it really works for that kind of music. This is a wood-bodied guitar used by a blues player. I happen to know that it was refinished at the factory after the original paint had problems. It started peeling off. It has a couple of little issues. I'm recording this in mid-August. The player was doing an outside gig recently in the heat and humidity, and all of a sudden his guitar was quiet. He wasn't getting anything out of his pickup, and he wondered if it had failed. The innards of these National pickups are packed in there pretty tight to get them so low profile. He wondered whether the sun beating down had expanded the metal enough to short something out, because, you know, when he got home, it worked just fine. He hasn't been able to duplicate the problem since, and it was maybe related to an inexperienced tech working the soundboard. But he landed on the idea of redundancy and adding a second pickup with its own jack. This would also let him send two different signals to two different amps and enjoy all of the creative ideas that come from that. The other thing is we're starting to get some fret wear in the first position. It's kind of a toss-up between trying to dress what's left or replacing them. He's decided to just go ahead and replace them. Be careful with the screws in your National guitar. Maybe you can be a little more heavy-handed in the wood-bodied ones. But if you've got a vintage German silver thing, the cover plate screws only engage with it for about a thread and a half. So if you strip them out, you've got real issues. Be very careful with these things. They're extremely delicate. Not difficult to put a dent in or tear, so find a safe place for this when it's out of the guitar. Someone once asked me if I could try and straighten one out that had been accidentally mangled, and it's like, no, you can't. It's gone. Okay, so you can see the sound well, which in this case I believe is made of brass. So it's an interesting hybrid. Dobros typically have wooden supports for their cones. And the National design all hinges around this extended spike, which comes off the end of the neck and travels the entire length of the guitar and is actually held in place with the tailpiece screw. You pull that out, and doing neck resets in these things usually involves removing the neck and then changing the angle at which this hits the back end of the guitar. That's held in place with a couple of wooden supports, I've seen other models that have additional supports in other areas around the back, but this is pretty typical. They're very robust, you know, they're not a lightweight instrument, that's for sure. Going to be employing this vintage DeArmond pickup. Unfortunately, it's lost the rubber date stamp on the back side, so we don't know exactly when it is. It may have had an additional cover plate. But the good thing is it's exceptionally narrow, very low profile, just a little bit thicker than the National pickup, but we're going to be installing it closer to the cover plate, and the strings are rising at that point, so I think we'll be okay. And we want the lowest profile as possible for the screw heads. This should do well. Put some tape down as an aid to centering things. It looks best if both pickups have the same center line. Might be a good idea to test this thing before drilling any holes. They do occasionally go bad, you know. 3.5k ohms. Is that... I need to check. I have received confirmation. This is the Hershey bar DeArmond, as found in things like the Stratotones, as opposed to the gold foils. The gold foils tend to have fairly high output, like 9, 10, 11k ohms. These little guys here are much lower. 3.5, 4 is normal. So, yeah, should be okay. Okay, I found a center line and marked this where I want it. I'm going to use a 3/32 bit to mark the position, mostly because it fits well in the hole. I'm not going to go all the way through because the screws I'll use will be smaller, but this will give me position. Trying to find some screws with the lowest possible profile head. The screws happen to fall directly under the outside strings, so I want as much clearance as possible, even though you're not likely to be fretting up around the 22nd fret on one of these. Tuner screws are too short. I usually use like a cut-off P90 screw. That's probably what will end up happening here. The owner sent these along, and I think that's exactly what they are. That'll do. I've said it before, but I think the miniature cut-off wheels for the Dremel, really, it's the killer app for this machine. It's okay at drilling, it's okay at routing stuff. Find carving exceptionally frustrating and slow, but these things, they make it all worthwhile. I need to extend the lead, so I'm going to use some of this braided shielded cable. And I want to make this as smooth a coupling as possible, because it's got to go down through a hole in the surface of the guitar, and I don't want to make that hole too gigantic. So I have to do things like remember to put on the heat shrink tubing before I wire the two sides. And you know, you will often see, if you are exposed to like handyman shorts and that kind of thing on YouTube or various other platforms, really convoluted schemes for joining wire. But you have to remember, most of those are aimed at people trying to steal electrical mains power. By which I mean to say, this is not going to be subject to a bunch of tension inside the guitar, so I don't have to make an elaborate braid. I can just hold the two parts together and then solder them. This also helps if it ever needs to come undone again, and I don't have to undo a knot in that case. This little exposed area here, I have some copper conductive tape, which I'll use to bridge the area which is not shielded at present. Okay, I'll drill some pilot holes. These screws are about 2.5 millimeters at 100 thousandths in diameter, so I used a drill bit that's about 80 thousandths or 2 millimeters. Now I have to drill a hole for the pickup lead, and this is probably 140 thousandths diameter. One of these radius template things works well to visualize where it's got to go. Screws don't have to be too long, just enough to get through the wood. I don't really like the way that's sitting. It's not flush with the top because the original rivets is what they were that held this to a pick guard. They come out and they're sort of holding, they're standoffs basically. So I'm thinking about taking this out and then chamfering those holes slightly so we can get this sitting flat. I want to reduce the height of the pickup to the minimum, and it looks weird. See these little guys here? They're not flush. And I can't really file them down because the pickup will fall apart then. This is what's holding the pickup together. So those have something to fit into now. I'm going to use a pure tone double leaf jack right beside the other one. About there. I'm going to do it about 1 inch. Drilled through with a couple of undersized bits, and I'll ream it to fit. It's just easier on the finish. These things have solid wood bodies, by the way. They're not laminated from plywood, which is surprising to me. That wire is going to be secured to the side, and I want to give myself enough leeway, but not too much extra so it's not flopping around anywhere. I'm going to check on the previous jack. If it's not a pure tone, we'll swap it out for a pure tone. This player likes them. Can't remember if I put this in or if it was factory installed. It would have been like a dozen years ago. Hook up the hot wire. It goes to the tip of the jack. Okay, so we need the ground from the original pickup here, and the ground that will connect to the tailpiece and ground the strings. And I'm going to put another ground in there because I'm going to sister it onto the new pickup's jack, leaving us not very much space in this little tiny hole. Going to heat up the wires and the part itself. Let the heat soak in for a bit. Get enough solder or solder. Allow a little bit more heat in there. Let it sit for a second or two to cool down and harden up. Don't move it during that period, otherwise you can end up with what's known as a cold solder joint, where it looks okay but the connection isn't great. So it looks alright. The reason I've got the extra ground wire to the second jack is so that I can sister both to the ground that goes to the tailpiece. Don't have to do two. Now we have these little peel and stick devices. It's good to clean the surface they're going to be sticking to before you try and stick them. They do not like dirty surfaces. It's good practice to vacuum out the entire box too, so that you're not inadvertently supplying the player with a maraca. So these frets are about 104 by about 40. So I'm going to go with a StewMac 149, which is I think 103 by 48 if memory serves. A good replacement. Just for giggles, let's dress out these divots and see what kind of height we would have left. So we'd end up with about 32 thousandths, which is okay. That's about as low as I would want to go. This player is happy to have full-size frets, so let's do that. We've got to do the first 4 at least. Boy, I got lucky. I have exactly this much wire of that size left on hand. It's time to put in an order. Heat them up, pull them out, or rather gently prise them from their resting place. Don't pull too much, no yanking, gentle. roll them, clean it, snip that shiny specimen to length. Snip once more. And again. When filing the ends of the frets, I can sight against a light-colored backdrop to see how far I've come. Check the surface of the fretboard, and it's pretty good and straight. I'm going to be leveling these new frets so that they're pretty close in height to the old ones. These are starting off around 48 thousandths of an inch tall. The other ones are about 40 thousandths, which is quite reasonable. I've got a layer of tape on frets farther up the board, which is going to keep me from cutting into them. Acts sort of like a depth stop. And I'm using my shorter leveling beam here, which is just a small, it's probably 10-inch level. And yeah, I'm just going to level these like I normally do. And I will recrown the tops. 8 thousandths of an inch is on the significant side when it comes to reducing fret height, so there's a bit more crowning than is normally necessary. They're pretty flat at this stage. I'll flap my wrist back and forth with some sandpaper to roll over the edges, and of course, polish and polish and polish. I'll make an effort to make the fret ends look something like the ones that came from the factory. Every company does them a little bit differently. I'll dress down the fret ends so that they're under the surface of the lacquer with a tiny little file. This will probably have to get redone come January. I'm going to go with some of these D'Addario nickel bronze strings, 13 to 56 set. These will work with magnetic pickups. There's enough nickel content in there to excite the magnetic field. Straight bronze frequently does not sound so great if you're playing it through a magnetic pickup. These turned out very nice, very much like the original ones. And there's plenty of clearance for the pickup. Quite happy with it.